Mac Power Users, episode 468, Mixing Macs and Microsoft with Christina Warren. Welcome back to Mac Power Users. I'm your host, Stephen Hackett, and I am joined, as always, by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hello, Stephen.
How are you?
Good. Very excited today. We've got a fun guest on the show. Looking forward to talking to her.
Yeah, our guest today, I know she's listening, but so just take this with a grain of salt, but one of my all-time favorite technology writers. I think the way she looks at things is unique and super smart. And I just want to talk about that and talk about what she's doing now. So, Christina Warren, welcome back.
Hey, guys. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I was telling you, Christina, before the show started, my sister, who is not a tech person, when you did that video a few years ago about FOMO or fear of missing out with the Apple Watch and you had to get one.
Yeah.
It's my sister who doesn't read anything I write, doesn't listen to any of my podcasts, but she found you and she thinks you're super cool. And then I told her that you were a friend, and then now all of a sudden I have some street cred in my family. So thank you.
You're welcome, and that's actually very flattering. I love it when I'm always still. It's weird. I'm still after all these years, and I bet you guys are the same way. Even though you have like thousands of people listening to your podcast, it still always feels weird when I meet someone who says, "Oh, I've been following you since whenever. I read all your stuff, or I really like your work." Sometimes it's really nice to hear that, because even though we know, like, realistically that people are hearing what we're doing, it still doesn't quite feel like, I don't know, you put it out in the void on the internet. You don't really know if there's ever anybody out there, if you're ever going to get the opportunity to meet people who actually read the things that you write or listen to the things that you say. And so when you do, that's always really awesome.
So true. I mean, we're just nerds in front of microphones right now, but there's a few people out there listening. So, it's been a while since you've been on the Mac Power Users, and when we had you before, I felt cheated a little bit, because that was the day Apple had the earnings call, and you had to run, so we didn't get a full episode with you, and we want a full episode with you, because you've got a lot of great ideas, and your life has changed a little bit since the last time we talked.
It's a little bit, yeah.
So what are you doing these days?
So I guess when we last talked, I was a senior tech correspondent at Mashable, and then I became a senior editor at Gizmodo, and now I work in developer relations at Microsoft.
Yes, the official first Microsoft employee on the Mac Power Users. And I can't think of a better one.
And look, honestly, nobody was, when I announced it on Twitter, so I've been there, it's been about 20 months now, I guess. And when I announced that I was leaving media as a full-time gig, I still get to do podcasts and I still, write some of my own things, but it's no longer like my living being a journalist. And I announced that I was going to Microsoft. I mean, the internet reaction was really funny, because people were like, wait a minute, wait, what? My nickname is CMac, as in like Christina uses a Mac. And people that I worked with who knew me as CMac, they didn't all necessarily know the origin of that nickname, but they just knew that was my nickname. And so the idea that CMac would go work at Microsoft in a different decade, even a few years ago, would have been like, a few years before I joined the company, would have been one of those like hilarious, like laughable ideas. And I still sometimes, it's funny, like the ultimate like Apple, Mac, iOS, fangirl, person is working at Microsoft. But it's true, I am.
Yeah, and I think that's really kind of an unfair thing for Mac users to be hard on Microsoft, at least at this point. I used to give them a really hard time about Office when we first had the switch over to the Intel chips. It felt like for a couple of years it was like they were asleep at the switch over there. But I remember the old days of Macworld, how many Microsoft Mac developers would show up for Macworld, and those people, they were, rabid Mac users.
Yeah, and that's still the way, at the company. So we obviously have, we make Mac software, the Office team being the most significant part, but even the Visual Studio Code team and, people who are working on other parts of the company are working, we have a very, very big iOS team, for all the different products and services. And so, but I think even before that happened, you had like that contention of the people who worked on those things were like hardcore, Mac developers, just happened to work at Microsoft. And the company has changed a lot since Satya Nadella took over, and Apple's changed a lot, and the world has changed a lot, but I think many people still see things in like 1997 terms. Mm-hmm. And even though it's 22 years later, it's still, for better or worse, a lot of companies still kind of fight like their historical images. And so one of the most frequent questions that I have, when I started working at Microsoft, and I started working there in 2017, one of the first, joke that people would make, and everybody thought they were so original. They were like, "Are they going to make you use a Windows phone?" And like at that point, it wasn't even actively, developed. I don't think it had been officially.
The war was over.
Yeah, I don't think it had been officially announced that it wasn't going forward, but it was like not the mission. And I was like, no. I went into my interview wearing an Apple Watch and using an iPhone and had my other stuff. And they obviously knew who I was when they interviewed me. And there was like no question about that. But even for me, when I had my choice of laptop for the first team that I was on, because I was on a different team very briefly, and then I moved into the team that I'm in now in cloud advocacy, working on Azure. They asked me what laptop I wanted, and I was told I could choose a Mac, but I was also given a choice of like a Surface Book, and I felt not like I was forced to take a Surface Book, but I felt like that's the right move, right? Like that's what everybody else will be doing. So just go ahead and take a Surface Book. And then I got there and I realized that my colleague who was kind of my counterpart doing the same job but with a different focus area was using a Mac. And I saw more and more people with Macs, and I was like, oh man, I could have picked a Mac. And when I moved teams, I was joking with my new manager. I was like, so can I get a Mac now? And I was just kind of joking. He was like 13 or 15. And I would say about probably 80% of my team uses MacBook Pros as their primary machines. Now that doesn't mean that they run Mac OS exclusively. They might run, Linux virtual machines. They might run, Windows, VMs, whatever. But probably 80% of my team uses Macs as on their work machines. And the people who use Windows, they do it because they want to use Windows. People who use Linux do it because they want to use Linux. Obviously, if you're working on Windows, you're going to be using Windows, but it's actually an environment where you use the technology that works for you. You use the product that works for you. We are standardized on Microsoft Office, obviously, but even within our own organization, we use some third-party tools, for collaboration and things like that work better for us. So the interesting thing that I didn't know going in, and that even when I first started, that even I had those misconceptions, was, I'm going to have to work a certain way or change my workflow. And certainly parts of my workflow have changed, right? But I mean, I have a work issued MacBook Pro that I'm currently in the middle of doing a bunch of international stops on a tech conference tour series that we're doing, and I'm presenting from my MacBook Pro. Like, that's how I'm doing it.
Yeah, I was just up in Seattle a few weeks ago, and you and I missed each other because you're a world traveler now. We're going to talk about that later. But there were several Microsoft employees that were listeners of Automators that came in, and it's the same thing. I think you're probably not the last Microsoft employee we're going to have on, because these are some really smart people that are just using the heck out of their Macs, and it's good to see that's really not changed. I told you the other day on the phone, I'd share it again on the show. I feel like that, those old days of Microsoft, Windows versus Mac, it's so irrelevant at this point. If anything, I feel like Microsoft and Apple, in a lot of ways, have more in common against the rest of the industry, because now it's more of a business model dichotomy. You got the people who make money by selling ads and the people who make money by selling software or hardware. And in that way, Microsoft and Apple are a lot closer than they are to each other than they are the rest of the industry at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, Microsoft's business has expanded beyond just, Windows. Obviously, Windows is still a big deal. And Microsoft makes, the Surface, line of hardware products. But I mean, specifically the area where I work in, which is Azure, is all around cloud services. And in that case, we really don't care what you're doing. Just as many of our virtual machines are running Linux as they are Windows, and running them very well. I mean, every Azure VM that I have, or container or anything else, is based in Linux. And the same thing goes. I mean, we have Microsoft acquired a company called Xamarin, and which built like a cross-platform code editor to build Android and iOS apps using C# and or Mono, which was the open source implementation of C#, but C# itself is .NET rather. Mono is the open source implementation of .NET, but .NET itself is now open source. But anyway, they bought Xamarin and renamed it, Visual Studio for Mac. And so there are a lot of mobile app developers, especially in the enterprise, who are developing iOS and even Mac apps, using that. And then we even have things like the company Hockey was acquired by Microsoft a number of years ago, and it's morphed into like a Visual Studio App Center and some other things. And there are some interesting tools where people, even if you're not using like the .NET stuff, if you're like just native iOS or macOS developer, you can do testing of your apps, using our cloud services. And a lot of our APIs and things that we're writing are, like platform agnostic. And so the way that Microsoft as a company kind of looks at things is much less focused on, we need to keep everybody just in our own vertical ecosystem, which was how it was maybe, 7 or 8 years ago. And it's now much more like, we want to create the right tools and the right platforms to help developers, build the best things they can, and then to offer, end users the best experience they can get. I actually had a really interesting conversation about a year ago with some members of the Mac team for Microsoft Office about the 11-year plus journey of unifying the Office code base, because there had been a period of time when things forked, because there had been a time when the code base is forked, and this very, very long process of unifying the code bases back together. So at this point, Microsoft Office on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android is all running on, and the web is all running on the same base. There are obviously native elements and some differences in some features across those apps, but it is the same basic code base. And it was a tremendous effort that took the Mac and the iOS team many, many years to get right. But I think even then, like, you see that even taking on those things, it ends up with a better overall user experience, better compatibility, more native, depending on, you get the native experience no matter what platform you're on. And that's kind of been the going philosophy for the company since a couple years before I joined, but certainly now that I'm there. And that's been really cool to see as kind of an outsider and somebody who used to cover the tech industry and do a lot of analyses to kind of, and, I'd heard a lot about the changes happening at Microsoft, but then to actually see those changes happen. And then as an end user, actually get to see the benefits of those changes. But to your overall point, yeah, I mean, I think that Apple and Microsoft are more alike and are more synonymous in many ways, and kind of that, are we competitors in certain ways? Sure, just like any other tech company. But I think it's very complementary in many aspects, because, my bosses don't care if I'm using a MacBook, like if, and frankly, if I'm writing code for the web, or if I'm doing something else, like, it doesn't really matter, like what platform I'm using. So
all that stuff is paid off on the consumer side too. Just look at something like Office for iPad, which is an incredibly great product. Like it's really, really good. And they have all this stuff tied together with Office 365. And like, they have built an ecosystem now that if you're a consumer, you can just use Office wherever. And, the people we were talking about earlier who may be stuck, like it's 1997, it'd blow 1997, like Microsoft users' minds that their platform would be basically everywhere, but I think it's paying off looking at the way people talk about it and then the numbers that they release.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and I think the products are getting better too. I mean, I was super excited and kind of surprised. So the way that we do stuff with our Office releases at work, you have an opportunity to install what's called like dog food releases. So you can get like the latest cutting edge versions. I typically don't do that on mobile because sometimes it's not always as stable, but I do it on desktop. And, we got Mojave dark mode support really, really early in the Office release cycle. And now it's supported across the entire suite. Even the new redesign of Outlook supports dark mode, and so does, PowerPoint and Excel and Word. And that's really cool. And just seeing like how quickly that happened made me, as like a Mac user, really excited. And I know that the team must have worked really hard on it. But and to your point, I mean, and I'm not just saying this because I work at Microsoft. I was saying this sort of thing before I did. Like, I think that on the mobile especially, some of the products are best in class. I put it up against anybody. I've been saying for 3 years that the best Gmail client you can get in iOS is Outlook. And I think that when you look at, especially if you have Office 365, what you can do on an iPad Pro with Office, I'm just going to say it, I think it's superior to what you can do in Pages or Numbers. So, take that for what you will, but with what inherent biases I say, saying that, but I think the experience is really good, and that's ultimately really good for consumers.
Yeah, I used to joke, one of my bits when I talk to people is like, if 5 years ago I were to tell you that there's two companies, Microsoft and Google, and 5 years from now, one of them is going to be a Class A player on the iPad with the most recent software updates and supporting the most recent features, and the other one's going to lag behind like 18 months. Now, guess which is which? Who would have thought it would be Microsoft? That being said, as you were talking, it has dawned on me that now I have a window or an angle into the iOS Word team, the app I use every day for hours. So I'm going to start sending you lists. Just be warned. You can throw them in the trash if you want.
No, I mean, I can't guarantee that I can get stuff done, but I do know people. I will put things in, I will put you in contact, or I will send your feedback to the right channels. Let's just put it that way. So,
Stephen, are you using Microsoft stuff that much at this point?
I use Excel for a couple of things a month, sort of like closing relays, into the month stuff. But we are basically all on G Suite at work. It was the better option when we started, and we haven't really looked elsewhere. But I keep Office installed. I do stuff in it, but Google is still the sort of my bread and butter day to day.
And Christina, I don't think we've really explained what is it that you're doing, to the extent you can talk about it, inside that big company.
Yeah, no, sure. So I'm a cloud developer advocate, and so I work on the developer relations team within Azure. And basically, most of our advocates are focused on specific technology areas where they have expertise, and they go into their communities, which usually have been places where they've had big followings before they joined Microsoft, and listen to both share new things that are happening and cool technologies, whether they're directly related to what Microsoft is doing or not, but also listen to feedback from users, and then work with the product teams. Because of my background, I'm more of kind of a jack of all trades, master of none sort of person. So I don't have a specific technology focus area, but I do do a lot of our video and content strategy. So we have a YouTube channel, Microsoft Developer, where we do a lot of developer focused content, throughout Microsoft ecosystem and the web ecosystem. And I do a weekly news show on that, but I also contribute to planning and looking at some of the other types of themes and things that we're doing when we do big live events like Build, our big developer conference, or Ignite, which is one of our big shows in the fall. I will do a lot of live programming, both interviewing people, whether it's executives or it's other developers, and kind of explaining new things that are coming out. I work with our documentation team on creating videos for our learning platform, where I'll maybe be like the talking head, walking through something. And then most recently, what I've been doing is I work a lot directly with the product teams as kind of a conduit between what we're hearing from users and user feedback, and what they're working on. And so the way I kind of view my role is that I'm not necessarily advocating for Azure. I'm advocating for the user to get the best experience. And so that means if they're having a hard time doing something, I want to be able to take that feedback and I want to be able to make it better. Or if they're unaware that something is an option, I want to be able to let them know, hey, these are the things you can do. And some of these things might include our options and some of them might include some other things, but I want them to know what's happening. And I want to make it easy to explain, this is what you can do, this is how you can do it, this is how easy or difficult it might be. We'll talk more about some of my travel a little bit later, but one of the reasons I've been traveling so much is we've been doing this event called Microsoft Ignite the Tour, where we've been going to 17 cities around the world and giving deeply technical talks on a lot of different topics across kind of both around Microsoft 365, but also really deeply around Azure and developer focused topics. And I've been giving 2 talks at a lot of those stops, one on introduction to Azure and cloud computing and one on introduction to Azure networking. And so my job also includes, when we have events like that, working on creating the content, working with my colleagues who, help me with that, and finalizing the PowerPoints and figuring out what the presentations are going to look like, and figuring out demos and all that sort of stuff, and then of course presenting the talks themselves.
For people who may not be familiar, what's sort of the elevator pitch for Azure services? So,
Azure is our cloud computing platform. So if you're familiar with AWS or DigitalOcean or Google Cloud, that's what we do. And so we offer compute, meaning like VMs or containers or whatever, networking and storage solutions for the cloud. So basically, rather than having to maintain your own hardware and pay for it, and do your patches, you can use ours. And so if you're looking at, and we offer all kinds of different things, right? Like I said, Visual Studio, App Center is an option if you want to test your app on a bunch of different versions of iOS and a bunch of different screen sizes, and you don't have all the hardware. You can do that in parallel in the cloud and deploy those builds and see how it's going to look. If you want to build, a website, you can, use, or a web app, you can use whatever framework you want and use Azure to host that. If you, if you have kind of an existing application and you're an enterprise and you're looking to maybe modernize things and you want some things to be run locally and some things run in the cloud, we offer options for that sort of thing too. So, we're like AWS, but, Microsoft.
Yeah. How long has that been around at Microsoft? I know it's been around for a while, but it feels like it's come to prominence over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So I think I would have to look. It started out as, it was known as Windows Azure, and then it became Microsoft Azure. And it's been about a decade now, actually, I believe. So, So it's been around a while, but it really, I think I would venture to say the naming, or the initial naming, might have had some, understanding problems with it. People might have assumed that it was only good if you were running, Windows servers virtually and whatnot.
Right.
And we've certainly expanded our services and our offerings a whole lot in the last couple of years. It's gone through a lot of changes very quickly. Obviously Amazon has a great product and they've been doing things for a really long time. We are doing our best to have equally good products and in some cases, even be industry leading for things like our managed Kubernetes service and things like that. But yeah, you're right. In the last few years is when you start to hear like the analysts talk more about Azure revenue and whatnot, and it's become a bigger part of the business. And that's because more and more companies are using the cloud because it makes more sense than owning, or renting their own hardware and maintaining that stuff. And so having a lot of data centers and being really good at managing those data centers and having services that will run well and efficiently and whatnot is a good thing. So it's become a bigger part of the business, I would say, in the last 5 years. Really, the last 3, we've seen a bunch of changes. And one of the challenges that we face as advocates is that if somebody used the product a few years ago, things are very different now. The things change very quickly, and both in features and in capabilities. And so, trying to keep up to date on all those things, but also hoping that people will give it another chance. They'll take a look at it if they're, going to use something else. And then because it's more than just like, hosting an app. We also have, machine learning and AI, frameworks to do stuff like, if you want to do that type of thing. And we have other cognitive services like, speech to text or, image recognition and stuff like that. There are a lot of different options. And so trying to kind of let people know, hey, you can do this on Azure is part of my job.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you in part by our friends at Hover. Building your online identity has never been more important. And with Hover, you can find the domain name that shows the world who you are and what you're passionate about. So my blog's domain, 512pixels.net, is registered at Hover. It's been there a really long time. And that name means the world to me. I've been writing there for many, many years. It now is covering the YouTube channel. That name is just sort of where I am online. And I know that that domain is safe and secure at Hover because they really respect my privacy and they allow me to keep my domain separate from my hosting. So I'm not stuck with a hosting service that doesn't meet my needs. I really love that Hover has no upsells. They have a really clean user interface. Look, we've all been to those other domain registrars where they want to add a bunch of stuff to your cart at the last minute. Hover respects you and they respect what you're trying to do with their service. So they don't do any of that stuff. And they have the best customer support team I've ever used at a domain registrar. So if you have a question about DNS or setting something up, you can contact them. You can talk to a real person who can walk you through it quickly and easily. So if you want to show the world what you're passionate about, Hover is here to help you make that first step. Head over to hover.com/MPU and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. My thanks to Hover for their support of this show and Relay FM.
So, Christina, we hear now you're using a MacBook Pro. Is it 13 or 15?
It's a 2017 13-inch.
All right. How do you like it?
I like it. I've had some keyboard issues, as a lot of other people have. I have at home, and what I'm actually recording this on right now is I have a 2017 5K iMac, and I love that. That's one of my favorite machines.
It's funny how nobody can talk about the MacBooks at this point without the caveat of the keyboard. It's like,
well, it's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy.
Like I was saying, 80% of my colleagues have this laptop, and last year, especially, it was kind of one of those things where you would see, certain people kind of like downplay the severity, in my opinion, of the issue. And I was saying, I have 6 colleagues, who have had to have their machines either replaced or repaired. And that was in a very brief kind of time period. And those were all 2017 models. This was before, they redesigned things for 2018. And I've certainly, had the thing where I've had to, blow the compressed air, under my laptop and whatnot. I'm glad I haven't had a show-stopping incident. But if you're typing for a living, whether it's programming or writing or anything else, having a keyboard not work is sort of not good.
Yeah, my daughter's iMac just died. It was a 2011, so it's ready for death. But and there's a really funny thread, by the way, in the forums on oldest Macs running, and I disqualified Steven because he doesn't.
Right.
But
I felt targeted by that.
but replacing it, I thought, well, she's going to be going to college in a year. Maybe I should get her a MacBook Pro. And I'm like, oh, wait a second. I just want to wait and just see what happens because I don't want to send her somewhere across the country and have a keyboard failing on her. And it is sad that that's kind of where we're at with one of Apple's premier products. But anyway, so you're using a 13-inch MacBook Pro, and then
I am.
Are you? And you said you're on iPhone. Which iPhone are you on?
I'm on the iPhone XS Max.
All right, Team Max. Like so many of us on Relay.
It's the only way that I could convince myself to get the new one.
Yeah.
Was I was like, well, I'll get the bigger screen, and I actually really do like it. Are you also on the Max?
Yeah, I think Steven is too.
That's a little complicated. I have a Max.
Okay.
But I picked up an iPhone XR recently, and I really like that. And I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
We are going to have to talk about that at some point in the future, Steven. And then are you using? And then you're using an iPad as well?
I am. Yeah, I have an 11-inch iPad Pro. I got myself for my birthday, and I have an Apple Watch Series 4.
How do you like the new iPad?
I love it. I love it. I didn't have the 10.5-inch model. I had the 9.7-inch. And so I love that it's basically the same physical size, but has way more screen real estate. The Apple Pencil is, I mean, it actually makes sense now in terms of, being able to just quickly pair and kind of connect and charge. I really like that. And I don't love the Smart Folio case. I didn't get the keyboard case. I just got like the smart case. I don't love it because the magnets don't feel quite that strong. And I wish that it was like the old style where it would just kind of, like be inset in. I preferred that. And I think that for what it costs, it's a little bit overpriced. But I love the machine. My only real complaint on the iPad Pro at this point is that I don't feel like the software is been able to take advantage of the hardware's capabilities. I feel like we're kind of hamstrung, and and that's like, because it's so powerful. You could do so much on it. You could replace your laptop with it, except you can't because the software ecosystem and kind of the sandbox stuff just isn't there. At least not for me, not for my use cases. I could do email and I could do, editing PowerPoint fine. I can't do anything, in code, unless, I'm doing kind of a browser based thing, and that's not ideal. The terminal stuff is okay on iOS, but it's not, as robust as what I would need. So, but the hardware is good enough. That's the frustrating thing. You're like, just let me have full access to some of these things and some mobile first really powerful apps. I'm hoping maybe when Photoshop comes that will drive some things forward. I would love to see Final Cut and Logic on the iPad. I'm kind of annoyed that neither of them are there.
Yeah. A question that sort of came to me as you were talking. Apple seems to be unwilling to cross the line of mixing the Mac and touchscreen devices, right? We don't have any touch MacBooks, but Microsoft and its OEM partners are kind of leading the way in that. Like
totally.
The Surface Book and all this stuff is all. So having used one, like, do you have thoughts around bringing touch to Mac OS, like the pros or cons, or do you find yourself frustrated you can't reach out and touch the Mac where you can on your Surface or on your iPad?
So it's weird, right? Because I feel like I'm such a Mac user that even though I have both the Surface Book, and I actually bought a Huawei MateBook X Pro, which is like the best MacBook Pro knockoff ever, except it's way cheaper. It was inexpensive, and I was a little intoxicated at XOXO, and I bought it, and I don't regret it, and it's the first Windows laptop that I've bought myself in years. I also got my husband a Surface Go that he loves as a tiny machine. And it's interesting, right? Because in some ways, it is actually really useful, especially web browsing, to just be able to scroll by just touching up on the screen. And on apps, I think that support it well, it's good. The problem is, and I'm sure this is why Apple has resisted, is that if you don't get those touch points just right, it's not a great experience. So sometimes I even forget that I have a touch screen, if that makes any sense. And so I don't deal with it. But where I do use it very frequently is obviously, scrolling through web pages, trying to go kind of the next thing. It's very useful for presentations, especially if you have a model that will detach. My Huawei does not, but my Surface Book obviously does, and the Surface Go does. And so if you're, taking something to a meeting and you want to show something off, you can just swipe through the same way you could on an iPad, but you have the benefit of having, the entire full, powerful operating system behind the scenes and not be kind of hamstrung. That's kind of, it's sort of interesting. I understand, like, I guess the hesitance of bringing that over, but at the same time, I almost feel like if Apple's doing the marzipan thing and bringing these iOS apps over to Mac OS, then, it's a matter of time or maybe semantics before we get something that, some sort of desktop experience that has a touchscreen. I feel like, for better or worse, that's probably where things are going. Things can be improved. I mean, this is something Google's working on too, obviously, with Chrome OS and with their Andromeda, kind of their next generation OS thing. And it's a tough problem, but I think when done well, you notice how useful it can be. And it's funny, it wasn't until I started using, my Surface Book a lot more that I would find myself touching my MacBook screen. But actually, even before that, the first time I ever touched a MacBook screen was when I was reviewing the MacBook Pro with Touch Bar, and having that Touch Bar there made me like want to touch the screen.
Yeah, it's so close.
It's so close.
This is right there.
So I don't know. It's an interesting problem, but I would be very surprised if, I've been predicting for years. I don't know when it'll happen, and I don't know anything. This is just me pontificating. But I do, foresee, an ultimate kind of merger between, iOS and macOS. And I think if that happens, then you have to deal with the interface differences. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not still have like a primary mouse keyboard thing for one and touch for another. But if you're bringing over those touch-centric apps to the desktop, and we already see kind of the problems that kind of has, you're kind of almost inviting, well, in this world, these would work really well with, touch, or at the very least, pencil. I don't know.
I can't help but feel like a lot of stuff that we thought was not on the table for Apple is now on the table. And I'm just really curious to see what happens in the next year or two in terms of those types of questions.
Yeah, I agree.
So now, as speaking of XOXO, I remember once you and I sitting in it out there on the field,
yes,
for hours and watching you do almost all of your work on your iPhone. You are an iPhone power user,
totally.
And is that still the case with the new gig?
Yeah, definitely. Like I was saying before, Outlook as a mail client is fantastic, and it's interesting. I still use Mail.app, but I use it now primarily because I don't want to mix my work and my personal. And it's not that I'm worried about like the intermixing of the two spheres. Like I have access to my work email in the Mail.app, but I keep Outlook solely for work stuff just because it's easier for me to compartmentalize. But that app is really great, and I love it because the calendar is integrated, which seems like such a simple thing, and I know other apps do it too, but it is, for me, somebody who deals with calendar stuff all the time, really useful. The Office apps, I also, use those. Our web, the way our authentication works, we have a system called SharePoint, which is where people can share things, and you obviously have like online, versions of documents and other things. And in some ways, it's actually easier to stay logged in iOS than it is to have to, re-authenticate over and over again on a desktop. So yeah, I still use iOS for a ton of things. I use apps like Drafts, text editor, all the time, especially when I'm writing scripts and I'm collecting things, and I might be like in an Uber or a Lyft on my way to work, but I'm coming in later in the afternoon instead of in the morning, and I might be making some changes to the text file that I'm going to then send to the teleprompter, which is an iPad that I'm going to be reading off of, and making those changes, and I still do a ton of stuff on my phone. There's certain things that I can't.
Can I just interrupt there for 1 second?
Sure.
Because I think that was an interesting workflow. So you are capturing the text for your teleprompter in Drafts, and then do you run it to the teleprompter directly from Drafts, or does it go somewhere else first?
I save it to Dropbox because the teleprompter app reads from Dropbox.
Gotcha. And then now Drafts usually when you open it will give you, that's what the app is famous for. It gives you a blank screen every time you open it up. Are you doing that, or are you like using Drafts more kind of like in a traditional Notes app capacity where you're going into existing drafts and working on those?
It depends. If I'm starting from scratch, then I will just open up the blank document and then just, welcome back to another episode of This Week on Channel 9. I'm your host, Christina Warren, blah, blah, blah. Actually, so last year, a little over a year ago, I was crossing the street in a pedestrian crosswalk. That's important to note. And I was hit by a car. And go figure, I lived in New York for years, never had any issues, was in Seattle for, less than a year, and was hit by a car. And I was okay, but I broke my right wrist, and I'm right-handed. And that made, the first few weeks I was actually in a splint where I didn't have any mobility of my hand at all. And, I had very little use of, my fingers even able to touch things on my phone. But but that was limited, let alone using a keyboard. Once I got the Cast, it was fine, but I was in a splint for 3 weeks. And Drafts was really useful because I was using the voice to a text feature, as well as some of the other kind of shortcuts and things that I've built in over the years to be able to do one-handed editing. And without that, I don't know if I would have been able to do a lot of the script stuff that I do at work, honestly, because I've never cared more about accessibility and really realized how important that is until I had a temporary disability. And I've really become more committed to, trying to keep my eyes open and pay attention to those things. But that was like an app, and that workflow, like the iPhone workflow, it's hard to use a full computer or even an iPad when you are only one-handed, especially if it's like a temporary thing and you're not used to it. But with, the phone, it was much easier for me to kind of, still get a lot of things done.
Yeah, that's a big deal because Nuance seems to be kind of, leaving the premises with respect to Apple. And one of my favorite features of Drafts is it has the ability to record dictation without a timer, whereas every other app does it. I think it's kind of a trick that the developer pulled. I almost am hesitant to talk about it in the show because I know people from Apple listen, and I don't want him to get shut down on it. But if you're having dictation on iOS, Drafts is probably the best place to do it. You still have to be aware of that timer because it kind of does a little reset once in a while.
Right.
But if you're careful with it, you can just keep going, and that is really nice.
Oh, and that was the thing for me, right? Is that a lot of it was I just wanted to keep going, and you're right. Those other things, they time out, and you've got to start over again. And for my workflow, that just wasn't going to work. And so so Drafts was fantastic for that. And I use it, I use it on the iPad as well, but on the phone especially, it's just one of those things I just love to just power through. And sometimes I'll edit existing things. I have like a Dropbox folder attached to it that is also connected to my various computers. In fact, even like my Windows machines that I have connected to Visual Studio Code. And so all of my, documents are in one place. And that way I can just, pull, MD files or text files or whatever from Drafts and just, make edits or additions or whatever.
And just to close the loop, because I know people are going to ask us, what is the app you're using to run the teleprompter text?
There are a lot of good teleprompter apps on iOS, and this one actually has it's really good because it has a Apple Watch app, and so you can actually start from the Apple Watch, which is really useful if you're in a scenario where your camera person is behind the studio doors and you don't want to have and you mess up and you want to stop and start again, and you don't want to have to bring somebody else out there to mess up your camera shot, which is one of the things I use. It's just called teleprompter. I think it's like $10 for the full version, and I really like it. There are some other really good ones. This one I didn't actually choose. It was one that my colleagues kind of picked, and then I started using because of that, but I've come to really like it. You can set the text size and the speed, and like I said, I really do like that Apple Watch feature because to be able to pause and restart from your Apple Watch is really useful, because what I do a lot of times, I'm standing in front of a green screen, the camera is set, the focus is set, so I can't step forward and readjust things because then the camera has to be reset. And so usually somebody who's on the other side of the studio would have to, come in and redo it. But if in a pinch, or if I'm recording on my own, for instance, like if I'm recording from a hotel room, then I can just restart the teleprompter that way, which is really great.
Now, we're going to put a link for that in the show notes, so because I know that they all have the same name, and I have struggled through that. I've been trying to find a good teleprompter myself, so I'm looking forward to giving this one a try. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by our friends at Luna Display. Turn your iPad into a second monitor for your Mac. Go to lunadisplay.com and enter promo code POWER to get 10% off. Have you ever looked at your iPad and wished you could use it as a second display for your Mac? Luna Display lets you do just that. And it makes sense, right? Your iPad already has a gorgeous display, and you can always use some extra space when working from your Mac. Luna Display provides crystal clear image quality, reliable performance, and wireless flexibility. You just pop a little piece of hardware into your Mac and you're good to go. And if you don't have access to a Wi-Fi connection, no worries. You can connect with USB. When using Luna Display, you can set up your workplace anywhere so you can be productive at the office, in the studio, or even on a hotel room when you're on a trip. You get more screen real estate without the expense of buying a second screen. Luna also acts as a complete extension to your Mac. It's going to support your external keyboard as well as your Apple Pencil and touch interactions, so you can interact with your Mac with a swipe of a finger. I backed the Luna Display when they went into funding immediately because I knew this was a product I would find useful. I keep an iPad on my desk next to my iMac all day, and while sometimes I'm using it as an iOS device, it's really nice just propping it up and making it a secondary screen for my Mac when that's convenient. It just takes a minute to set it up, and I use it all the time. Just this morning, I was doing some work that required me to reference a pretty complex Excel spreadsheet. I was able to put it on my iPad with Luna Display, keep it right next to my iMac screen so I could have it there as I did my work. When I was done, I quit the Luna Display app and then went back to using my iPad as an iPad. Listeners of Mac Power Users can get an exclusive 10% off on Luna Display. Just go to lunadisplay.com and enter promo code POWER, P-O-W-E-R, at checkout. That's lunadisplay.com, promo code POWER at checkout to get 10% off. Our thanks to Luna Display for their support of this show and all of Relay FM.
So what about the iPad? You said you've got one of the new Pros, but where does that fit in at work, or is that a device just at home?
It kind of depends. I don't use it a ton at work. I mean, I could, but it's primarily just kind of my tablet. You know, I watch a lot of movies on it. Actually, I would say this. Now that I'm traveling so much, it has become really useful just to have a great, travel device if I need to access some work stuff, but I don't have time to do maybe not have time is the wrong word. Maybe I don't want to drag out the full laptop. Then it's really great that I can, power through some emails or look at some other documents or pull some things up. But if I'm being totally candid, I mean, I spent a lot of money on the iPad Pro 11-inch. I got the 256 model with LTE, basically to watch Netflix. So, I'm not the best person to, take power tips from. I'm not Federico or Jason Snell. But I do like the new machine so much. It's really good. It's one of those things I want to do more things on it,
I was on a flight recently and I saw a guy with a 12-inch MacBook, in the next row over. This is the smallest MacBook Apple makes. And even that wasn't really usable on an airplane because they've got the seats so close together and the tray and the guy in front of him was leaning back.
Completely.
And, I think at this point, a laptop is almost not feasible on an airplane unless you've got nice seats.
No, you're dead on. I mean, it's actually one of those things that I really like about the Surface Go is that it is. I used it on a commuter flight from between Seattle and San Francisco. So one of the really small flights. So even if you have the nice seats, you have no tray table at all. And because the nice seats are basically just a tiny bit more legroom. That fit that device fit on the tray table. But if somebody leans back, even those things are a pinch. So you're right. Having an 11-inch iPad is a really good way to kind of get work done if you do that. I do not have the keyboard. I use an external Bluetooth keyboard because I don't like the Apple keyboard case. I'm waiting for Logitech or somebody else to come out with something that I like better, but I just don't like the Apple keyboard case. I never have. And so I don't have that. I know a lot of people like it. Great. It's just for tactile reasons and for the stuff that I do, I don't. So instead, when I need to type, I travel with I have a Logitech Bluetooth keyboard that I just, keep in my bag.
Okay, so I have to make an admission. I do like a lot of the Microsoft products. As I said earlier, I use Microsoft Word all the time for my job. But when it comes to presentations, you're going to have to pull Keynote out of my cold, dead hands.
Don't blame you. I
love Keynote so much. But
Keynote's great.
But you're using PowerPoint a lot. And
I am.
I got thinking, we haven't had anybody on the show that's been daily using PowerPoint, maybe ever. So how is PowerPoint, and what do you like about it, and what do you not like about it?
It's gotten a lot better. So it's interesting because if I'm doing a presentation that is not something that needs to be repeatable, or that is, where I'm like uploading the slides someplace, I still use Keynote. Like that's still what I do. We even have kind of like a template that some people on our team use that have some of our graphics and things that is organized, that's designed for Keynote. We have one for PowerPoint as well. But what I have to say, what was interesting to me is when I first especially was using Windows a little bit more, which I did more the first 6 or 7 months I was at Microsoft, as I was really impressed with how good PowerPoint was on Windows. And even a year ago, it wasn't quite parity on Mac. And there might still be some differences, but one of the things that I now really appreciate is that they're almost feature for feature parity. There's still some differences, but they're really close. And what I really do like, and this is, a useful thing, I like that if I create a PowerPoint and have it just so, and I do it on Windows, it's going to look and work exactly the same way on a Mac and vice versa. And as much as I love Keynote, if I have to give a presentation on a machine that's not a Mac, which is not uncommon, especially if you're speaking like at a school or something and you're not able to use your own machine, converting that Keynote file to a PowerPoint usually means your fonts or something else will go wrong. And so I do really appreciate that consistency. I also, I don't really, I have some more customized themes and different things that I've done. There are probably some automated things you can do with PowerPoint that I don't do. I'm not as much of a power user as maybe some people. There's a new feature. There's some things I would like to tweak to it, but you can now, for instance, add like a YouTube link and make like a YouTube video, a slide. I wish that were a tiny bit better. But all in all, like that's a good feature. And as a design tool, I don't think, you can use Keynote as a full-fledged kind of UX tool. PowerPoint's not quite there, but you can still do a lot with it. And if you are bringing in information from Excel or Word or whatever, it does work really well, especially with Excel stuff. So, but I think for me, the biggest thing is just the consistency, just knowing that it's going to work and look the same no matter where I'm at. And that's a big deal, especially if you're, potentially presenting on a bunch of different machines or having to, give content, upload content that other people are going to download. So.
Yeah, I mean, I speak every year at the ABA, the American Bar Association, and of course lawyers, most of them use Windows. And there's lots of really smart attorneys and presentation experts making some great stuff on PowerPoint these days. And I'm aware that it's come a long way, but I just haven't really had an opportunity to use it because I have such a strong skill set in Keynote. It's hard. That's just a whole nother reason I don't want to have to go learn something.
Well, that's the thing too, is they're different. I mean, I've actually kind of come around to, there's this movement, Brett Terpstra is somebody who kind of turned me onto this, and some of my colleagues do this too, where people will create slides in Markdown and then use basically JavaScript to create their presentations, and it's kind of awesome. Yeah, there's a Mac app deck set where you can, which makes it really easy to take Markdown files and make them into really good looking kind of simple presentations.
Yeah, but the problem with that, I've seen Brett do that, and they are impressive. But for me, like all of my presentations are like it's a picture of an old car or something, and so a lot of my slides you don't write them in Markdown,
No, totally. Well, I mean, where it's useful, I guess, is if you have a lot of code snippets and if you have a lot of that sort of thing, because that can still be more difficult in whether you're using PowerPoint or Keynote. If you're doing code snippets and if you're wanting to show that sort of stuff off, it can be really useful. So, but overall, you've been happy with it using PowerPoint, yeah? I have.
And
I've been kind of surprised because up until this tour, I've never really used PowerPoint, at least on the Mac, quite as intensely. One thing that actually recently changed, and I used to blame PowerPoint for this, and then I realized it was actually a Mac OS issue. So I don't know how they got around it, but I used to always like on PowerPoint for Windows that you could export, a presentation and had the fonts embedded, whereas you couldn't do that on Mac, and that was actually a Mac OS thing. And I don't know what changed, but now apparently that's supported. So you can, when you export a presentation or whatever, you can opt to have the fonts preserved, which is really good. Because for me, that's always like the most frustrating thing, if you're going to speak someplace, It's, you have the Keynote file, you have your fonts loaded, you have whatever, or you have your PowerPoint file and you have your fonts loaded and folder, and like, you need to make sure that it looks just so on the presenter's machine. So
yeah, when I was doing jury work, I always like to use Keynote. One of the reasons why it's really unfair to Microsoft, but a lot of the people that are on the jury, they go to work and their bosses, force them through Death March PowerPoints, and they're almost always in one of the basic Microsoft templates because that's what people at businesses do. So
totally,
I always felt like one advantage I had, it's totally unfair to PowerPoint, but it's unlikely that they're going to have seen my presentation template before.
Right.
Definitely. And it's even less unlikely that they're going to have. Did I just do a double negative? I don't know. Either way, it's even less likely that they have seen their boss lecture at them with my template. And I always felt like that gave me a little advantage. And it bared out because at the end they would always say, "Oh man, I really like your presentation. Can I get your PowerPoint deck?" They wanted to take it back and
definitely.
use the template.
I mean, I honestly think that's been one of the big things too, is like Keynote has beautiful templates and you can do it in PowerPoint. It just maybe takes more effort. For the project we're working on, it's actually a very nice template that people designed, and it is PowerPoint. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like there are literally whole teams of people who that's their job, is to, create good looking, decks repeatable for tours and for projects and things. And, you can do it in both ways. It just depends on what you're more comfortable with. I mean, I look, like I said, for my personal things, I still use Keynote, but I've been, like impressed and happy with how PowerPoint has come along. And I think that parity aspect for me is really important.
That's a general impression I get too. I mean, it's a lot better than it used to be.
Yeah. And I mean, I would also say, the people that I work with are going to be sending me things in PowerPoint. And so it's good to be able to kind of view it natively. I don't mind, you can open it up in Keynote or whatever, but yeah, it's going to work better in PowerPoint. But also dark mode support. Like I'm just impressed with those sorts of things, and having the YouTube, slide support, and, there are good things with it. So I still am with you. I'm more comfortable with Keynote, but it's gotten good. I've always been a Word person and an Excel person. Pages is fine. But, if I was going to have to, usually I use a text editor. I don't even use a word processor. But if I was going to use a word processor, I've usually been a Word person. But I've always been a Keynote person.
Yeah, and the template thing I was talking about earlier is a solvable problem. If you're willing to pay $20, somebody is making a cool template that you can buy off the internet for either application.
That's true.
I want to change gears a little bit because I don't want your Mac Power Users episode to go by without talking about this interview you did in 2015. I know that's a while back now, but we don't get talk to many friends who get to interview Tim Cook. So if people aren't familiar with this, what was this interview about, and how did that go? So
it was amazing. So it was right before WWDC 2015, and Apple had introduced a WWDC scholarship program where they gave people from diverse backgrounds who didn't have experience coding. Some of them were kids, some college students, some of them women and men well into their kind of second careers. Invited them out to San Francisco, to the Moscone Center, and to attend WWDC. And Tim Cook surprised them on kind of the day before the conference. And I was given the opportunity to interview Tim Cook about some of the scholarship programs, Apple's diversity efforts, and I used that opportunity to ask him, why we hadn't had women on stage at Apple events, to which, he told me, you'll be really happy, stay tuned for tomorrow. And sure enough, the next day was the first time in I think many, many years that a woman had been on stage, for engineering stuff at a WWDC. And it's still kind of looking back on that moment, it was so surreal that he was so nice. I've been very lucky in my career. I've been able to interview a lot of amazing people. And he was incredibly kind and forthcoming, and funny. And we talked, when I called him on, things like the lack of, female representation on stage. He admitted to it. It wasn't one of those things where he was trying to pretend like it wasn't an issue. So definitely one of those kind of career highlight moments for me, for sure.
He seems so sincere when you see him interviewed.
Completely.
I can't imagine he's putting on an act, but you never know.
You never know, but honestly, I didn't get that sense, and not to say that my sense of those things is perfect, but yeah, it was definitely one of those. He was incredibly kind, because, like I said, I've been very fortunate. I've interviewed a lot of important people over the years, and he struck me as somebody who is really unique in that you very rarely see people of that position of power who are that. A, seem that sincere and down to earth, and B, like, he was focused on our conversation. It wasn't like he was, a million miles away. And that was really cool.
A lot of our listeners, very few are going to interview Tim Cook, but some of them are going to go into meetings and talk with people that have some degree of power, possibly power over them at work or something. And you have done this repeatedly for years. I mean, you do it with a lot of the executives at Microsoft. Now I know you've done it with Tim Cook. What's some advice you'd give somebody if you're going to go into, not necessarily even for a press interview, but just to speak with somebody like this?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing I always say is to listen. The best skill that I can always say for being a good interviewer is you need to be a good listener, because you need to listen to the cues that they're going to be saying of what might take your conversation in another way. For instance, the Tim Cook interview was one of those where I didn't want to be combative and, go directly to talking about, why haven't there been women on stage? If you care so much about diversity, you don't want to like go into one of those gotcha places. So to make it organic and not weird, you have to listen to your openings. The same thing goes with anything else. If you hear somebody talking about something that's really fascinating and it's not maybe getting enough attention, or you're confused about something, circling back and saying, hey, let's talk more about that. That what you just said there, that was really interesting. Let's talk more about that. So I think listening is really good, and listening for kind of your moments to maybe pick out something that might have been undersurfaced. I think too, doing your research and knowing kind of what you're talking about. I've been in situations where I've interviewed people that I didn't really have a great grasp of what I was going to be talking about beforehand. And sometimes I've been able to fake it really well, and sometimes I haven't. And it definitely is better when you have some sort of understanding of what you're doing going into it, especially when you're starting out. If you do it all the time, you get more used to kind of, going on the fly, but especially if it's something for work and whatnot, having a good research of kind of understanding what are we going to be talking about? What are the parameters? Knowing things that the person has talked about or done before can be useful. At the same time, don't over research, if that makes any sense, because you don't want to be overly kind of pat. This is going to be different for every single person. I tend to have kind of a bullet list of questions I would like to ask, but I don't keep myself to a script. So I have a thing of things in mind. Okay, these are some areas I know I would like to cover. And if we get to them, that's great. But if the conversation starts to go in a different direction, and especially into something more interesting, I don't want to circle back into something that's already been answered or that we've moved past just because it's on a piece of paper. So, some people really like to go by an interview list of questions. I'm not one of those people. I tend to have kind of an outline and then see where the conversation goes and adjust accordingly.
As an old lawyer, I can tell you, nothing makes me happier when I'm defending a client in a deposition than seeing that the other lawyer has a script. Because so often they just drive through that script and they never stop and actually listen to the answers. It's the safest way to protect a client, honestly. When they're not listening, they don't realize where there's points to follow up, and it happens all the time. It's funny how that overlaps. Do you use any technology for the prep, or do you just write it on a piece of paper?
Usually my iPad or my phone.
Sure. Back in drafts?
Yeah, drafts or Notes app, whatever.
Yeah.
The iPad is actually really useful for that when I'm doing, this is not as common now at Microsoft, but when I used to do, although sometimes it is, but when I would do like panel interviews, because I used to do that a whole lot, I would have, my iPad on my, lap, and then just kind of, be talking to the person or the panel. And then that would just kind of be where I would keep my notes. I do a podcast now with Microsoft's CTO, Kevin Scott, who's an amazing guy. He's an amazing technologist. He was early at Google, and then he was at AdMob, and then he was back at Google, and then he led engineering at LinkedIn for many years, and now he's Microsoft's all up CTO, and he's a brilliant guy, really smart. And we do a show called Behind the Tech, and how that show works, that he interviews someone in technology, and then he and I talk before and after. And so I often will listen to his interview and take notes on my iPad, and then when he and I are recording our segments, I'm referring to those notes when he and I are kind of, doing our wrap up at the end.
Are you finding using the pencil for stuff like that, or is it just keyboard and typing?
Just the keyboard. I wish that I could use the pencil. And maybe you guys have better suggestions for this than me, or maybe listeners out there do. I don't know of any good handwriting recognition iOS apps.
Try GoodNotes.
Okay.
They just did an update. It's very good.
Okay. I do have good notes, but because that's always the thing that I struggle with is it's like I can write it out, but I want it to convert to text. And for instance, I know I can use OneNote. I can do that on Windows. But I've struggled to kind of find that sort of same experience on the iPad.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by TextExpander from our friends at Smile. Well, look, we all have those things that we need to type again and again, and copy and paste is just an inefficient way to keep track of that sort of stuff. TextExpander makes us all more productive by taking care of all those words and phrases for us. TextExpander works in all your apps, so you can use it everywhere. Microsoft Word, Excel, Adobe Illustrator and InDesign, Apple's Pages, the list goes on and on. And all of your snippets are everywhere because TextExpander updates new and edited snippets between your Mac, iPhone, iPad, and Windows PC instantly. So, for instance, say that you have your address as a snippet and then you move. Well, you just put your new address in your phone, and when you sit down at your Mac and have to enter your address into 100 different web forms, it's just there waiting for you. You can spend less time typing and more time doing what you actually want to do. There are a bunch of free snippet groups for people like job recruiters, freelancers, ones with airport codes, brand names, lots of examples over the TextExpander website. You can simply incorporate those into your own TextExpander library. And you don't have to work alone. TextExpander for Teams lets you manage and share those snippets with your coworkers or entire company. So you have common messaging that employees need to send. You can make sure it's always the same with TextExpander. You can stay consistent and you can stay accurate. Show listeners will get 20% off their first year of TextExpander. Just visit textexpander.com/podcast to learn more, and be sure to tell them we sent you here at the Mac Power Users. That's textexpander.com/podcast. My thanks to TextExpander for supporting this show and Relay FM. So, Christina, you mentioned your podcast, Behind the Tech. There's a link to that in the show notes for people to go check out. That looks super interesting. I'm gonna check that out myself. But that's not the only show you do, is it?
No, it's not. So I do a little show here on Relay FM called Rocket, Accelerated Geek Conversation, with Simone de Rochefort and Brianna Wu. And we recently celebrated 200 episodes, which is amazing.
Yes,
so we've been doing
awesome.
it for right at 4 years. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever done, ever. And I think Brie and Simone would say the same thing. And it's just, I feel like our show gets better all the time, and I love it. We talk about the tech news of the week, but I like to think we come at it from a slightly different perspective than a lot of other tech news shows. It's really fun.
So I'm on the inside here. I know how it came together, but how did the three of y'all get together and decide that a weekly tech show is something that you wanted to bring to the world? So
it was funny because Bree and I knew each other. We met on app.net, and then we met at WWDC. And, then stuff happened, in her personal life with the Gamergate stuff. And she was doing, I guess, Isometric at the time. Mm-hmm. And she reached out to me. She was like, hey, I kind of want to do this tech news show. And she reached out to me, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. And she reached out to Simone. I didn't know Simone. Simone didn't know me. And so the first time I think that the three of us ever talked might have been like right before we recorded the first episode. So we got really lucky, because sometimes you're in those scenarios, and I've been in those scenarios before. I've been fired from podcasts before when I was not deemed somebody who fit in. But where all three of us just kind of meshed. And I think we all bring something really unique to the table, and Simone's ad reads are just like the best ever. Simone's just the best ever. Brie is too. But yeah, it was just one of those things. It was just like, I really liked the idea of having kind of a tech news show from a female perspective, because not to say that defines who any of us are, but that does give us a slightly different skew on the world. And most of the time when you listen to these types of shows, it's like three, dudes talking about their experiences with tech, and our experiences and our interests are different. And I would say the same thing would be true if it were, anybody else who doesn't fit into kind of the traditional thing. So I really, I like that. And I like that. I feel like we are doing something that's, slightly off center for the rest of kind of the tech news shows out there.
And you also do that show with Brett Terpstra that comes out occasionally.
And it comes out occasionally, Overtired, which is a great show. We are very long overdue, and that's partially because of my travel schedule. But Brett Terpstra is one of the best people in the world, and he and I have known each other for over a decade, and we worked together, when we were both bloggers at the Unofficial Apple Weblog, and we've been doing that show together for years. And that's just basically, two ADHD adults talking. It's ostensibly about tech, but it's also largely about Taylor Swift and pop culture and just kind of the things that keep us awake at night. It's called Overtired because neither of us can get enough sleep. So it's a fun show.
So what's your podcast gear? Just I'm sure people will be curious.
Yeah, sure. So I have a Yeti that I use at work if I need to record remotely. I have a Rode, the Podcaster USB. I do have a Heel PR40, but it's not connected right now. I actually just got a Samsung, like one of their cheap little remote, like a travel podcaster things. It's actually pretty good. I was actually really happy with it last week. So I'm going to use that more in my travel kit, figure out maybe the best mic placement. But yeah, that's my setup. I have a Yeti at work, a Rode at home, and a Samsung for on the road because it's so tiny and it fits into a bag. Because the thing is, the way that I'm traveling, I can't travel with like a good mic most of the time. It's just not really going to be feasible. So,
right. David and I understand that pain more than most.
Yeah, I actually had, I don't want to get too inside baseball, but I had a Heil PR40 for a while. It was a used one from a friend, and I never had a preamp that could drive it. That mic takes a lot of, it takes an expensive preamp.
Yeah, I have a Scarlett, I guess, 2x2 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that'll do it. But yeah, but it needs a lot. And that's why, like, the Rode I've been using for a decade, and it's still kicking. So that's what I'm recording on right now, because it's just kind of like my go-to setup. I have a stand, my headphones plugged in, and that's it.
Now, something that I've noticed since you've taken this new gig is that I frequently see your Instagram photos from airplane seats.
Yes.
You're traveling a lot these days.
So much. Oh my God. Like I'm literally, right after we record this, I have to finish doing laundry because I'm flying out to Milan, which when we set up doing the recording for this show was not scheduled. I found out literally in the middle of my last trip. They were like, hey, can you go to Milan? I was like, okay. So
I'm having a real hard time feeling bad for you right now.
That's okay.
I get it. I think if I had to travel a lot, I would get tired of it really quick. But still, it's fun to think about jumping on a plane to Milan. But so, with all your geek skills, you've been in this Apple community for a long time.
Yes.
And you're doing lots of travel now. Can you share any tips with us
Yes.
for your technology or otherwise as we're all planning trips?
Definitely. Okay. So I have the AirFly, the AirPod, I guess like or iFly, maybe that's what it's called. Whatever the USB, or not USB, but a Bluetooth to headphone jack adapter that 12 South makes. That you can plug into your airplane seat and basically use your IFE system with your AirPods or any other Bluetooth headphones. You can use other types of those too, but I did like the 12 South one, and that's really good. I use that. For headphones, I don't use AirPods because I want something noise canceling. So I had the Sony WH-1000 XM2 headphones, but I lost them when I was in Atlanta over the holidays. And so I got the XM3s, which are new. They're $350. They're expensive, but they have amazing noise canceling, fantastic battery life, and they're USB-C charging. And I didn't think that USB-C charging would be one of those things that would make a difference for me. But now that the iPad is USB-C and my MacBook is USB-C, I want to keep, as few connectors as possible. So those headphones for noise canceling, for battery life, are just stunning. They feel great too. They're really comfortable. I wore them, on 19 hours worth of flights each way last week. I'm about to put them on for, like 13, 14 hours worth of flights today. I also would say getting a good USB-C battery pack is something that I would recommend to any heavy traveler. What capacity you get is up to you. I got something from a company called Sanho. They had like the Hyper Juice. It was a Kickstarter. I got it because I was part of the early backers. It's, I think, available on Indiegogo now, but they seem to be a little bit delayed. It's good. It's expensive, but it's good. Mophie is making one that is not quite as powerful, that is shipping and more readily available. What I like about the Sanho battery is that it actually will do 100-watt output of USB-C, meaning you could fully charge, like at full capacity, a 15-inch MacBook Pro. But it'll also output at 60 watts, and it's the highest capacity that you can carry on an airplane. You probably don't need all that power, but I really like having a USB-C battery because that way it makes it really easy to, charge your phone, charge your iPad, charge your laptop, charge your headphones, and then the battery also has like a regular USB-A port on it, so you can charge your phone too. But I find like having a big battery pack is invaluable because you never know what's going to happen. Good headphones. And then, downloading content from like Amazon or Netflix or iTunes, before you go is one of the things that I do before I leave the house, and make sure that I have like movies and books and other stuff loaded. So those are kind of my go-to tips, I guess I should say.
When I was just coming back from Seattle just last week, as the plane was landing, this is a funny story, Stephen. I took the iPad out of the pocket in front of the seat as the plane was landing, to put it in my bag. And just as I was about to put it in my bag, the pilot hit the brakes, and simultaneously the magnetic link between the pencil and the iPad failed. And
oh no,
the pencil hit the center of the aisle like a toboggan.
Oh no.
And as it hit the brakes, it just slid forward like 15 rows.
Oh
right
no.
down the center of the aisle. This perfectly white Apple Pencil. And I'm sitting there strapped in, the plane's braking, I'm just watching it slide forward, just waiting for it to veer left or right so I can just realize I have to buy a new one at that point.
Right.
But it stayed in the perfect center of the aisle. And so I'm sitting there, and I leaned out over the seat and kept my head on the pencil the entire time. I would not look at anything else. And because if somebody reached out and grabbed, I wanted to recognize the hand. And then as soon as we gated, I unbuckled and ran up 15 aisles and got my pencil.
I love it. I love it.
It was like, I don't know, you couldn't plan it that way.
No, totally. I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons why I don't tend to use the pencil on an airplane. I travel with it, but I tend not to take it out because I'm afraid of things like that happening. Even with like the new magnet setup, I'm like, nope, gonna lose this. That's okay.
I didn't have the fear, but now I do. So thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome, everybody. You're welcome.
It's ruined for everyone.
So, but now when you get on a plane, Christine, do you bring the 13-inch MacBook Pro? I mean, what is the tech loadout when you've got a long flight?
Oh God. Well, I mean, I usually don't take it out, but sometimes I do. Yeah. So my laptop bag is ridiculous. So I travel with a Windows laptop and a MacBook just because I need a backup. Usually some sort of, little mini hard drive, discs, whatever, cables galore, my iPad, battery pack, headphones, cable of every type. When I'm flying international, I'm usually flying business class. I'm very lucky that way. And so in that case, if it's a long enough flight, then I can pull out the MacBook and work on it. But it just kind of depends. If I'm doing like a one day thing, like if I'm just going to San Francisco to record a podcast and I'm coming back the exact same day, I usually don't bring my laptop.
Yeah, it's always the question. At what point, and that gets back to the beginning about the iPad and the software constraints. It's like, at what point do you have to bring the big boy,
Yeah, exactly. Because like in a perfect world, like I could be presenting from PowerPoint, on from my iPad, using USB-C, but they're just, but because of some of the demos and the things that I do in the presentation, I can't. So, yeah.
What's the biggest technology failure you've ever had on a trip?
Oh, I've had like full-on system crashes before. This hasn't been at Microsoft, thankfully, knock on wood. But yeah, I've had full-on system crashes, like have to go to the Apple Store. Actually, probably the biggest one, and beyond that, was in 2010. I was on a trip to Miami, and I got out of the cab, and it was a yellow cab, and I paid in cash. And I realized as soon as I stepped out of the cab that I had left my iPhone in the cab. And I ran out after him, and I wasn't able to track it down. And I had a meeting with somebody. I had a meeting with a PayPal executive that day. And I had to go to the Apple Store in South Beach and buy a brand new iPhone 3GS. And they called AT&T and did the whole thing with me. This was before Find My Phone was free. And sign up for Mobile Me again, even though I didn't want it, just so I could get the Find My Phone feature on the new phone. The Apple Store people were kind. They hugged me. I paid, $500-$600, whatever, for a new phone because I wasn't, out of my contract. That was pretty bad. That was also before iCloud and any of that. But that story ended up turning out good because fast forward about 6 hours later, I'm at this conference and I get this email from somebody saying, "Did you lose a phone?" And someone in Little Havana, which is very far from South Beach, had found my phone in the back of a cab, had tracked down my email, and I wasn't able to meet up with the person to pick up my phone, so he mailed it to me. Stranger.
There's still nice people in the world.
Yeah, he's Canadian, so that's what I'm going to hold it to, because I don't know if an American would have done that. I don't know if I would have mailed. I would like to think now that it's happened to me, I would mail somebody their phone. But that was the worst thing because I literally had to, before meetings and whatnot, I literally didn't have my phone, and I literally had to go buy a new phone. That was the worst thing. That was totally catastrophic. That was...
And 2010 is when the cloud was still pretty rough. So getting your data probably wasn't that easy.
No, I couldn't get my data because there was no iCloud. It was Mobile Me. So they didn't even have the backup system then,
Yeah.
It was, yeah. So I was really lucky that I was then able to get, a new phone, get my old phone back and not have to go through the whole process of restoring and from an iTunes backup and all that stuff. I mean, that was not great. So now that's one of those things I always try to check and make sure that I know where things are, that I have backups of things.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to 1Password.com/MPU in all caps to get 20% off. With 1Password, you only ever really need to memorize just one password. All your other passwords and important information are protected by your master password, which you only know. Once you install 1Password, all your logins and private documents are securely locked in your 1Password vault. This keeps your information locked away from thieves, hackers, and all the other unsavory types out there on the internet. And gang, there's a lot of unsavory types. Just in this past week, it was announced there's a collection of 773 million compromised email logins. It's out there, all the bad guys already have it, and they're using it. About 140 million of those email addresses had never appeared before in these hacked lists. Yours might be one of them. 1Password makes it easy to find out. They have integration with the Have I Been Owned website in their Watchtower service. It's right in the application, so it'll take a look at your passwords and let you know if there's a problem. One of the things I love about 1Password is that you're not just getting a great password application, you're also getting a group of people looking out for you and adding features to that application to help protect you from all the various ways the bad guys are trying to get into your data. So if you've got 1Password already, go in and check your Watchtower alerts to see if you got caught up in this latest data breach. And if you don't have 1Password, go get it. It's a great way to protect yourself and your data. Just head over to 1Password.com/MPU in all caps and you'll get 20% off. Thank you, 1Password, for all of your support.
So let's wrap this up by talking about some of your favorite apps. What are those go-to things for you day to day?
Okay, so Visual Studio Code has become my favorite text editor, and I honestly, it shocks me. I was a TextMate diehard for a really, really long time, and Visual Studio Code, yes, it's Electron. No, I'm not going to apologize for loving it. It is a great app. It's actually funny. Before I started working at Microsoft, I was on a flight to CES, and this guy, I'm sitting next to him, and I see his code editor, and I tap him on the shoulder, and I was like, "Look, I swear to God, I'm not trying to be creepy, but what code editor are you using?" He was like, "Oh, it's Visual Studio Code." And I was like, "Huh, that's pretty cool." And that was before it had even added some of the other things they have now. If you're looking for a really extensible text editor that's open source, that's actively developed, that has a huge community around it, I highly recommend it. There's even a great Apple Script extension. If you want to do Apple scripting stuff, there's some other people who've written extensions for iOS development and whatnot. I love VS Code. I have said, and I don't know, if they are, I don't think they're a sponsor this week. They might have been a sponsor in the past. I can assure you this is completely unprompted and natural. I love SetApp. I have a SetApp subscription, and I've discovered so many really good Mac apps using SetApp. Things that I wouldn't have bought otherwise. Like there's an app called Tables Plus, which there was there's been an app for years called SQL, which is just like a really good kind of MySQL client for Mac OS. But it hasn't been updated in a long time, and it only supports MySQL, whereas Tables Plus is like a database management app. It'll support, but it supports a bunch of different database types. It's really good. It's frequently updated. I discovered that app because of SetApp, and I wouldn't have otherwise. But like it supports, SQLite and Microsoft SQL Server and MySQL and Redis and Cassandra and a bunch of other things. And so if you ever do anything with databases, I highly recommend Tables Plus. That's one that I use a lot. I also use Text Soap a lot because I do a lot of times like I have to write things in a certain way for one of our CMSs, and then things need to be written in a different way for the YouTube like text entry system. And rather than wanting to write them both ways, I just use like a regex, and I use TextSoap to kind of format the text as I need to. So
can I just put a +1 on that? We haven't talked about TextSoap on this show in years, but I use that all the time. I mean, like even if you just grab text from the internet that you want to put somewhere, TextSoap is a little app, and it's part of the SetApp subscription, and it just cleans all the garbage out of the text, all the extra code and carriage returns and all that stuff.
Yeah, it'll do that, and you can also have it set to run like a regex or some other script really easily over selected stuff. I love it. You're dead on. Like it's one of those things I knew about it, and I maybe had used it years ago, but I'd forgotten about it. I use that all the time. But SetApp in general, I just have to say, I've really discovered some really good apps that way. Speaking of regex, there's an app called Expressions, which is like a really good way to build regular expressions. So that's one that I use. But I mean, Bear Notes is really good. I'm a drafts person on iOS, but I think Bear has a really beautiful app. And I clearly like text editors a lot because I keep mentioning, text apps.
I was going to say, I was pasting these links and I was like, text editor, text editor, text editor.
What can I say? I that's me.
Christina, you're among family here. It's okay.
I think you said something really interesting about SetApp, and I feel the same way, that it sort of gives me the freedom to try apps that I wouldn't necessarily go try on my own, or even discover apps that I wouldn't have known existed. It's a really helpful service if you kind of like, I got these like issues on my Mac, problems I need to solve. I'm not sure how to do it. Sometimes just perusing what's in SetApp will be enough to jumpstart the process. Yeah,
and I've even been surprised sometimes where I've like looked at, I've heard about an app and I was like, oh, I'm going to get this, and then I'm like, wait a minute, this is on SetApp, and so it's great. I know some people are kind of, there's an app called Downy. I use this all the time. It's basically a GUI front end for YouTube DL, and it'll let you like download YouTube videos or Vimeo videos or other things. And a lot of times for things that when I'm creating assets for one of my shows where I'm referencing other videos that we've put on our channel, I want to like be able to get the video assets to the editor and like it's honestly faster to use that than it is to go through our cloud system, like, on our NAS.
That also works, by the way, if you want to travel. I mean,
Completely.
you can download a bunch of YouTube stuff and watch it on a plane.
Yeah, that's a great point. So,
well, Christina, I'm so glad we were able to get some of your time. I know how busy you are, and I think Steve and I are both really happy for the turns you have taken and the way things are going for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was so glad to be here, and I'm just glad that I still get to use a Mac. Like, I didn't think that I was going to be bad. I knew I would still be a Mac user, but it's actually been really exciting for me to be able to. I have like enterprise Mac experience now. I've like used Intune sometimes and know the pains and pleasures of trying to print from corporate printers, as a Mac user, in an enterprise environment, which I hadn't really had before. So. I'm glad to always be back and to talk with you both.
All right. So, Christina Warren, you're over at Microsoft. Any place on Twitter or where should people go if they want to keep up with you?
So you want to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, at film_girl. I tweet a lot, usually about pop culture and tech things and some other stuff. My Instagram is also film_girl. If you want to see the videos that I do at work, you can go to youtube.com/Microsoft developer. I have a really fun show that I do every week called This Week on Channel 9, where I like to wear nerdy shirts every week, and I actually think it's a pretty good show. It's an overview of kind of tech developer centric news, and I obviously am a co-host on Rocket on this very network on Relay FM.
Yeah, and I recommend everybody who's into Instagram follow Christina because she does so much travel that she puts some great pictures up. I always enjoy your stories when you're on the road. So hopefully I'll be looking at Milan tomorrow.
Yes, you definitely will. You definitely will.
All right, so we're the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. Stephen, where can folks find you?
512pixels.net.
All right, and I'm over at maxsparky.com. I'm going to put a shout out for my Instagram account, too. I've been doing a lot more of that lately. I'm at maxsparky on Instagram if you want to follow me there. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun. Last week I went to the NOM show and a bunch of pictures of me playing saxophones and just kind of good times. And Stephen, do you do Instagram?
I do. I'm over there as Stephen M. Hackett.
All right. Well, check that out. Thank you to our sponsors, Hover, Luna Display, Smile, and 1Password. And thank you again, Christina, for coming and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We'll see you all next week.